What's up, hipsters? Blake, best mustache in the game, back at it again. And today we're back for another Tuesday Brewsday. And today we're going to be building around mono white. And it's not your average mono white deck here. We're going to be focusing on Landfall, usually a green archetype, but we're going to be trying to do it in mono white today. Um, and kind of my concept behind this deck is how I kind of came up with the ideas. Mono white usually gets lands from a lot of cards that say when you have less lands than your opponent, you can go get a land or get more lands or play lands off the top of your deck, all that sort of stuff. However, once you catch up to your opponent's lands or have more than your opponent's lands, those effects don't do anything, right? So my goal with this deck and my theory behind this deck is our focuses are around playing certain lands like Lotus Field that essentially allow us to have the same amount of mana that we have, like by hitting our land drops for the turn, but we have less total lands. We have a less land count, so that way we can still be hitting our land drops and still be getting ahead on mana, but having the same or less lands as our opponents, so we can still take advantage of all those powerful effects that white has. So with that kind of in mind, we're going to be moving forward. And don't forget to do all the normal algorithm stuff, like, comment, subscribe. Before we get started into this deck tech, we have the new set just came out, Dominaria United. So I'll have my full set review coming out for that. All the commanders will be in the first video. I had already started recording it, but I ran into some technical issues, so that kind of killed my creativity on it, and I didn't really have time to get it out before this video, unfortunately. But you can expect that video, the commanders video, probably before the end of this week, and hopefully I can be able to squeeze in the full normal set as well. What I usually do is cover all the rares and all legends in the set, and then any commons or uncommons I feel are notable for the format. I don't know if I'm going to do that this time, at least for the main set, because the other videos are already going to take so long because there's so many legends in the set. But I do want to cover every legend, so I might have to cut the rares and best of the rest sort of set to a little bit shorter. But all that being said, that video is coming, so if you're looking forward to my set review, that'll be shortly coming. But today we're here for Brewsday. Every Tuesday we're making a new brew around a new deck idea. The last one was really well received around braids. So next video I will probably do a video around another new commander from the new set. There's a couple I have in mind that I quite like the design of. But yeah, all that being said, let's get into this deck tech. Today, with that kind of idea in mind of mono white landfall, the commander I've decided to go with is Heliod, God of the Sun. He's 3 and a white for a legendary enchantment creature god. He's a 5/6. He's indestructible, and as long as your devotion to white is less than 5, he isn't a creature. So when you have 5 white pips, which includes his own, then he's a creature. Other creatures you control have vigilance, and you can pay 2 white to create a 2/1 white cleric enchantment creature token. So kind of my theory behind this commander is it's mono white doesn't have a lot of like good payoffs for landfall in the command zone, at least. So my theory is at least the very least I could do as far as a commander that synergizes with landfall was to have a mana sink. As if I start making all this mana and getting some landfall triggers and stuff, mono white is always going to be susceptible to board wipes and spot removal and things like that. So my focus is to have something that's really sticky, which this is. It's an indestructible enchantment, and sometimes it's an indestructible creature. And it gives me a mana sink, so kind of when I need to, start using my mana to do other things when I'm running out of cards in hand or something else, this is a pretty decent mana sink, as well as giving our creatures passive vigilances. Allows us to be a little bit more proactive as well. My other alternative option was Jazal Goldmane, who's a 4... He's a 5 mana 4/4 first strike, and then you can pay 5 mana to give attacking creatures you control a bump in power equal to the number of attacking creatures you control. So once again, another mana sink, but it's much less reliable, and it kind of wants you to already be ahead to be doing this thing, while Heliod can always do its thing all the time, is much more sticky on the board, and still gives us the mana sink that we want. Plus, I was going to be leaning a little bit more into token synergy, but I just didn't find that, at least in this initial deck, that I had enough deck slots to dedicate a lot more to the token side of it as our kind of engine and end game. I decided to lean more into just kind of generic value to at least make sure, that the deck's off the ground and it works and the idea is solid. And then I'll go from there and start removing some of the like just generally good cards to put more of the token synergy stuff sort of in the deck. So this is kind of my initial list. This is what I'm going to go with to test the theory out and test the deck out. But yeah, all that being said, we'll get into the main deck now. We're just going to go in order here. We're just going to go down all the creatures first. First up, we got Admonition Angel. 3 white for a 6/6 flyer. It has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can exile a non-land permanent other than this. And then when this leaves the battlefield, all the things come back. This is generally not a great card. However, it will be quite good in our deck because we're going to be hitting multiple landfall triggers most turns, presumably. So this will be a pretty effective interaction piece, even if it's only temporary. Being able to hit any non-land permanent will allow us to disrupt our opponent's plans pretty well, as well as we're running quite a decent number of like fetch lands and instant speed ways to put lands into play. So this also allows us to interact our opponent on our opponent's turn. So normally I don't like this card, but this seems like a good home for it. Archivist of Ogma, 1 and a white for a 2/2 flash. Whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain a life and draw a card. Just generically a really good card, really good value. Just going to be a staple of white decks moving forward. We need cards like this to keep cards in our hand and keep doing our game. Avacyn Angel of Hope, 5 white for a 8/8 flying vigilance indestructible. Other permanents you control have indestructible. So this allows us to make our entire board sticky and not just our Heliod. It's a good end game card for us since we're going to be able to produce a lot of mana as we're a landfall based deck. So good top end card. Battle Angels of Tyr, 2 white for a 4/4 flying Myriad. When this deals combat damage to a player, draw a card if that player has more cards in hand. Then if they have more lands than you, you make a treasure. If they have more life than you, you gain 3 life. Once again, really good value card. The most important mode for us is drawing the card here for sure, as we want to make sure that we stay stocked with cards in hand. But the treasure and life are definitely nothing to scoff at here either. And it's a good beater in general. Burnished Heart, 3 mana for a 2/2. And you can pay 3 and sack to get 2 lands and put them into play. Real good card for our deck. I've kind of fallen off this card quite a bit over the last year or two, as we've just had much better options in all colors. But we have a lot of synergies to kind of play along with this. The turn that we sack it, bringing it back and stuff. And we'll kind of get into those and some of the sort of engine-y cards that we also pair with our Lotus Fields and those sort of cards. So we'll get into that. But this card does a little bit more work here than in most decks, which is good because I'm off this card on most decks. Cathar Commando, 1 and a white for a 3/1 flash. You can pay 1 and sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. This is just a staple of my white decks nowadays. This is a really good interaction card for white. Instant speed. It's on a creature. It's stable to a creature, so you can bring it back with all your creature reanimation and all that sort of stuff. So great card. Love Cathar Commando. Always does amazing work for the decks I put it in. Deep Gnome Terramancer, 1 and a white for a 2/2 flash. Whenever one or more lands enter the battlefield under an opponent's control without being played, you get to get a Plains card and put on the battlefield tapped, and then you do it just once a turn. Just a ramp card for 2 mana. You can hold it up in case you want to flash it in response to a fetch line or something. It also does double duty with our Heliod on the battlefield. If we draw this late game or something, we can hold up the mana to activate our Heliod, or if the opportunity arises, we can flash in the Terramancer. So really good, just generic value card in general, but also synergizes with our landfall theme. Elish Norn Grand Cenobite, 5 white for a 4/7 vigilance. Creatures you control get +2/+2. Creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. Great top end card for us. Helps clear the way for our creatures to get in. Makes our 2/1s that Heliod makes into 4/3s, which are real big threats all of a sudden. Just a great top end card in general for white decks. Emery Angel, 2 white for a 3/3 flying. And it has landfall. When the land enters the battlefield under your control, you get a 1/1 bird creature token with flying. Good landfall payoff. Card's not what it used to be. Obviously, this card's kind of outshined by most landfall cards nowadays, but we're in mono white, so we'll take advantage of this. This is one of our better landfall options for sure. We can definitely overrun our opponents with these birds. Emery Shepherd, 5 white for a 4/4 flyer. Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return a non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. And if the card's a Plains card, you get to put it into play instead. This is probably the best card in our deck. whenever we sack a fetch land to put up planes into play, we can bring back whatever we want to out of our graveyard. Do it. Put one of them into our hand, one of them into play. When we crack our Burnished Heart, we get 2 things into play. Our Mary Shepherd's great. It also pairs well with a lot of the other creatures that we've talked about that sack themselves to do their effects and such. So, excellent card. Esper Sentinel, 1 white mana for a 1/1. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, you draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Sentinel's power. Staple format, obviously. We need to draw cards. I usually like to play this nowadays in decks that reliably augment this card's power. That's where it's at its best. But even at a base level, this card's just really, really good. We need to draw cards in this deck, and this is a very efficient way to do it. People should always pay this one, but they just don't oftentimes. So, great card. Excellent card. Karmic Guide, 3 white for a 2/2. Flying, protection from black. It has Echo. So if you don't pay that cost at your next upkeep, you have to sack this. And then when it enters the battlefield, you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Super great for us. It allows us to kind of reanimate a lot of these big threats that we have on the top end, or just good vanilla like value creatures that we've kind of talked about and then we're going to talk more about. So Karmic Guide, just a staple of white decks. Good here too. Keeper of the Accord, 3 and a white for a 3/4 human soldier. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than you, you make a 1/1 soldier creature token. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player has more lands than you, you may search your library for a basic plains card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle your library. Super great. This is a card that pays us off very well for having less lands than our opponents, because we get one at each end step, and if that player has more than us. So if we can keep our land count low, this is going to just churn out tons of lands for us. So excellent card for our deck. 9 of the White Orchid. White for a 2/2 first strike. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more lands than you, you get a plains, put it into play. Great card. Great card for our deck. Does everything that we want. Core Cartographer. 3 and a white for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you search the library for a plains card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. This one doesn't have the conditional if you have less lands than your opponent. So that's really nice on this card. We love to see it. Core Cartographer is good. Loyal Warhound, another card just like the rest, the last couple. 1 and a white for a 3/1 dog, Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, search for basic plains, put it in the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Same reasons the other two are good. Mirror Entity, 2 and a white for a 1/1 changeling. You can pay X into it until end of turn. Creatures have base power toughness XX and gain all creature types. Great finisher for us. Good mana sink. As we start putting a bunch of 2/1s into play with Heliod or any of these other sort of creature effects, token making effects, all of a sudden we can use our tons of lands that we have to make them all into lethal threats. So Mirror Entity, excellent card for our deck. Really good mana sink. Good finisher. Sarah Paragon, a new card. 2 white for an angel. It's 3/4 flyer. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, exile, and you gain 2 life. Super important card for our deck. Really glad to see this one coming out. Kind of gives us a pseudo Lurrus effect for our mono white deck, which is really good. We really appreciate that. As the only other effect that we have in this deck that kind of does that is Crucible of Worlds. It's about the only other card I could find in mono white that lets us play lands for our graveyard. So really important card for the deck. Really good card. And if we don't need to play lands, we got plenty of lands going on, then we can just bring back an important creature, a good value creature, good synergy piece, whatever we need. So Sarah Paragon, excellent card. Really happy that this got printed for this deck. Skyclave Apparition, 1 white for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with converted mana cost 4 or less. And then when this leaves the battlefield, they get an XX, which is the card's CMC that this exiled. So one of the best interaction spells, kind of stapled to a creature in the format, I think. Not just in white, but like overall. Because you get to exile a non-land permanent that's 4 or less, so it gets rid of it for good. They don't get it back when this leaves either. They just get a random XX creature that's a just useless idiot. So yeah, Skyclave Apparition. Love this card. This card's always been an overperformer for me. Super great interaction piece. Great here too. Solemn Simulacrum. You know what Solemn does. I'm not going to read through it, but great card for the deck. Gets us lands, draws us a card when it dies. Does all the things we want. Sun Titan, Don't need to really read this one either, but it can get back lands or synergy pieces, the same thing that the Sarah Paragon can do. So great card for the deck. Trove Warden, 2 white for a 3/4 vigilance. Landfall, whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, exile target permanent with converted mana cost 3 less from your graveyard. And then when this dies, you put each permanent card exiled with it onto the battlefield under the control of that card's owner. Worded it really weird there. I'm sorry. Yeah, Trove Warden. Bet most people probably forgot this card existed because of the deluge of commander product we've gotten recently. But a really cool mono white landfall payoff here. Lets us get back our lands when this dies from playing lands or, whatever else other synergy pieces we have in our graveyard. The only problem with this card, for this deck at least, is I don't really have any sack outlets for this card. So it's going to have to die to like one of our board wipes or one of our opponent's board wipes or something. So that may be kind of not good enough to run it in the deck because it does have to die. It's not when it leaves the battlefield. So it's not like risky per se, but the value is definitely not guaranteed on this one with how the deck is currently built. And I don't really think that there's room to be putting in sack outlets for this deck or anything. So this one's kind of iffy. This one may get cut, but I at least want to try it. I've never got a chance to really try this card, and it seems like a good fit for the deck if we can make it work, if we can get it killed. So we'll see how it plays out at least. But this is one that may get cut. Verge Rangers, 2 and a white for a 3/3 first strike. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. As long as an opponent controls more lands than you, you may play lands off the top of your library. Once again, good card for our deck. Gets a pseudo card draw when we play a land off the top of our library. It's not a card from our hand, so we basically drew and played the card off the top of the library. So once again, another card that we have to kind of play around with having less lands. Just like Weathered Wayfarer, the next card. It's 1 white mana for a 1/1. You can pay a white and tap it. Search the library for a land card. Reveal it, put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only if an opponent has more lands than you. This one is definitely a very good one, as we have some not just plains in our deck that are very good. So we would really like to be able to go get those non-basic lands that are good synergy cards for our deck, like the Lotus Fields and some of the other ones we'll get into. So yeah, this one is really important for us to kind of have less lands than our opponent. Really good value card here. All right, so that's kind of the creature suite. You got a good idea of what I'm kind of looking at here. I'm either looking for like landfall stuff, things that pay us off for getting more lands or gets us more lands, or just good generic value sort of cards like card draw-y sort of cards. So that way, we don't run out of things to do. So that's kind of what I'm looking for as far as creatures. Sorceries, I have a few tutors and the rest are kind of board wipes. And then there's 2 modal DFCs. First, we got Austere Command. You know what it does. It's a great board wipe. It's modal. Kills whatever's ailing us. So yeah, Austere Command, great. Emeria's Call. This one's a modal DFC. The spell side of this is 4 white. We create 2 4/4 Angel Warrior creature tokens with flying. And then non-angel creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. Non-angel creatures we control, obviously. And then the backside is the land that we can either pay 3 mana or have it enter tapped. So yeah, modal DFCs, always great. This is a nice flexible card for us if we need something to do. Making 2 4/4s is definitely not bad. Unfortunately, this is a sorcery, so we can't like flash into 4/4s to block, or we can't flash this card in to protect our board from a board wipe by giving everything else indestructible. So kind of a bummer there, but the cost of inclusion here is basically nothing. This is just a land. And when we need a spell, sometimes we'll hold this in our hand and play it later. So Mary's Call is great. Modal DFCs are great. Farewell. One of the best board wipes in the format. For 6 mana, you kind of get everything here. Choose 1 or more. Exile all artifacts, all creatures, all enchantments, and or all graveyards. Just gets rid of everything for good. The only thing it doesn't have is planeswalkers, but that's very, very passable. We can live with that. I will say most of the time we will not exile graveyards in this deck, as we do use our graveyard quite a bit. But this is just an answer everything all at once sort of button. It's an emergency button, so we'll definitely take it. And sometimes it won't really even hurt us that bad, but it'll ruin our opponents. Absolutely ruin our opponents. So yeah, this is for 6 mana board wipe, this is the most you could ask for, basically. Idyllic Tutor, 2 and a white for a sorcery. Search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. We only have 7 enchantments, but some of them are very important to our game plan. So I think this is at least worth running in the meantime to test it out. It may get cut as we are running another couple tutors in here. So this is definitely the worst of the tutors that we have. But I think it's worth trying just because we have some enchantments that are really important, really good. So we'll run it for now, try it out. And if we draw 1 or 2 of them, we have still more to get. We have 7 in the deck, so we still got targets for it. Ondu Inversion, Nether Modal DFC. The front side of this one's 6 and a white for destroy all non-land permanents, and the back side's a tapped white land. Once again, Modal DFCs are great. Cost of inclusion is very low here, and sometimes we'll really appreciate the board wipe. So love Modal DFCs. They're great. Savine's Reclamation, my favorite white card, so you knew it was going to be here. Also works great with our deck. 2 and a white for a sorcery. Return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell is cast from a graveyard, you may copy the spell and choose a new target for the copy. And the flashback is 4 and a white. So what's important to us is this gets back lands that we sacrifice to our Lotus Field lands and other things. So great card. And we can also get back all the same things that Sun Titan can, important synergy pieces, that sort of stuff. Amazing card. Goes in all my white decks. Super great here. Vanquish the Horde. Maybe the best creature board wipe for mono white. 6 white. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. Destroy all creatures. So Blasphemous Act's good. This one's great too. 2 mana, kills all creatures. Can't ask for a more efficient rate, really. Vanquish the Horde. We need some board wipes, so this one's great. All right, we'll move to instants. Now, we have some very good and important instants here that synergize with our landfalls and not just removal in this section. But that's kind of what we're looking at here. We're either looking at removal, protection, or sort of landfall synergies. And the first one falls under the landfall sort of category. It's called Brought Back. It's white for an instant. Choose up to 2 target permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped. So whenever we crack a fetch land or we sack 2 lands to our Lotus Veil or, any sort of land sacrificing effects, then we get to bring them back, get our landfall synergies going again. So one thing that's kind of important in this deck is if you don't have to crack your fetch lands, you definitely want to hold on to them, as we have cards like this and a few others that we're going to get into where you can get back all the things that you sacrifice in a turn, or a couple things that you sacrifice during a turn, and then we get extra lands out of that deal because it'll bring back our fetch lands plus the things that we were planning on sacking anyway. So yeah, Brought Back, great card. It can ramp us 2 lands at once, can save 2 of our important synergy pieces. So yeah, great card. Love Brought Back. Next up, Cosmic Intervention. This is kind of Brought Back on steroids. 3 and a white for an instant. If a permanent you control would be put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile instead. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and it has Foretell for 1 and a white. So basically it does all the same things that Brought Back does, but for everything till the end of turn. So that's great. The only thing is the things don't hit the graveyard. They get exiled instead. So that's good in some ways, is that we'll dodge like graveyard hate and stuff, but it's bad in some ways for like death triggers and that sort of stuff. Luckily, we don't have very many of those. We just have like Solemn and maybe 1 or 2 others. So that part of it doesn't really hurt us hardly at all, but just an important thing to note. But yeah, this is an excellent, sort of save all of our things, bring all of our things back from a board wipe, or to when we crack all of our fetches at once or sack some lands to do some effect. Great card. It'll ramp us really well. Enlightened Tutor, 1 mana for an instant. Search your library for an artifact or enchantment card. You put it on top. Great card. Lets us get all the important enchantments that we have in the deck. And we have a few important artifacts like the Crucible of Worlds I mentioned earlier, and some other ones we'll get into pretty shortly. Great card for this deck. Really, really versatile. Gets us everything from landfall synergies to just generic card value to, kind of whatever we need. So tutors are good. This one's perfect for our deck. Faith's Reward, 3 and a white for an instant. Return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So basically Cosmic Intervention Part 2. Great effect for us. Allows us to bring all of our lands back and all of our things back. So love to see that. Generous Gift, 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target permanent its controller gets a 3/3. one of the best removal spells in the format. Destroys whatever the problem is, it gets rid of it, and they just get some stupid 3/3 in return. So 3 mana is obviously not the most efficient removal, but I'm sure Generous Gift and Beast Within are great. So it's in the deck. Heliod's Intervention, good removal spell and mana sink. X white white for an instant. Choose one, destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. We're going to have a lot of mana lying around this deck, so this is going to be basically a board wipe for artifacts or enchantments. But that doesn't kill our stuff. But if we need to, we can play it early game to get rid of something that's really pesky. So Heliod's Intervention, great card for white decks. Extra good here. Kabir Digtown. Hey, another modal DFC. This one on the backside is a tapped white source. On the front side, it's a removal spell. It's a 1 and a white for an instant. Kabir Takedown deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target a creature or planeswalker. We're not like a super go wide deck. We'll probably only have a couple creatures on the battlefield for most of the game. But still, this is a 2 mana kill like some random synergy dork that our opponents have. So yeah, we still appreciate this. Most of the time it'll be a land, but sometimes it'll be a very important removal spell. So yeah, Kabir Takedown, modal DFCs are great. Path to Exile, 1 white mana for an instant. Exile target creature is controlled and may search their library for a basic land, put on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Notably, it's actually hilarious in this deck. That's almost a good thing for our opponents to have another land, because it will make us trigger all of our opponents having more lands things more reliably. So that is funny. Not all the time do I go to Path to Exile anymore, but this seems like a perfect place. It's got some extra cute synergies with our deck as well. So next up, we got Second Sunrise, 1 white white for an instant. Each player returns to play all artifact, enchantment, creature, and land cards that were put to the graveyard from play this turn. So this is a 1 mana less than Faith's Reward, but it Faith's Rewards for everybody. So just be a little careful with this one. If your opponents are are capable of sacking a bunch of stuff all at once, then maybe don't play this right at that time, as it would give them a ton of extra value. But most of the time, this is going to do all the same things that Faith's Reward does for us. So just time this one well. Just think about it before you cast it. Swords to Plowshares. You know what it does. Amazing removal spell. We're playing white, so we're playing it. It's Fairy's Protection. You know what it does. It saves you from whatever's problem. Sometimes we're going to need save from certain problems that we can't answer. So it's Fairy's Protection's here to do that. All right, next we got artifacts. Got some pretty cool ones here. And some pretty just normal ones that you'd expect. Most of this is just mana-based sort of stuff. Either gets us more mana or, allows us to get more land synergies that we've kind of had in the deck that we've talked about. So first up, the staple, Arcane Signet. You know what it does. It's a mana rock. We need mana rocks even though we're a lands deck. As most of our lands pay off sort of stuff, want our opponents to have more lands, so we still need to be able to develop and produce more mana early on in the game. Archaeomancer's Map, 2 and a white for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for 2 basic planes and you put them in your hand. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under your opponent's control, if that player controls more lands than you, you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. So it draws us 2 cards in the form of planes, and it helps us play more lands by our opponents having more lands. So excellent card. Love to see it. It's also on a permanent, so if this randomly ends up in the graveyard, we can bring it back with our sort of Sun Titan effects and stuff. So great card. The aforementioned Crucible of Worlds. It's a 3 mana artifact that lets you play lands from your graveyard. Super important card in this deck, as we are capable of sacking lands pretty reliably, so this will give us extra value when we put them on our graveyard. Expedition Map, also another very important card for this deck. 1 generic mana, and you can pay 2 and sack it to search library for a land, and you put it in your hand. So let's just get our Lotus Fields and some of our other important lands that we'll get into shortly. Very important tutor for the deck. It's one of the only ways that we have to tutor lands besides Weathered Wayfarer. Non-basic lands, I should say. So, yeah, Expedition Map, excellent card for the deck. Felwar Stone, it's a mana rock. Another new card, Gerard's Hourglass Pendant. Ooh, this is a really cool one for the deck, too. Love to see this one. It's a 1 mana artifact with flash. It's got some random text here. It says if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. It's annoying, but doesn't really do anything. That's not why we're playing it. Why we're playing it is it has the ability of 4 mana, tap, exile this. Return to the battlefield tapped all artifact, creature, enchantment, and land cards in the graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn in your graveyard. So that sound familiar? Yeah, it's just Faith's Reward on an artifact. Notably, the pendant does exile itself, so even though this is a permanent, we can't continually bring it back with Sun Titan or whatever, which is a bummer. However, we'll take as much as this Faith Reward effect as we can get. So really happy that we got one on a permanent like this for this deck. So those are the two. This and Sarah Paragon were two very important cards for this deck to help flesh it out. I've kind of been brewing this idea for a while, but I'm really happy to see these coming out just in time for me to make this. Next up, Heraldic Banner. 3 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a color. Creatures of the chosen color get an extra power, and then this taps for a mana of the chosen color. So this makes all of our random tokens and idiot creatures that we have lying around into a little bit better threats. It's kind of an anthem stapled onto Mana Rock, so I've been looking for places to try this card out. I think this card's pretty good, and I think it'll fit well in this deck. So I haven't. 3 mana rocks are a little iffy for me. They have to do quite a bit, but I think this one does enough for this deck. Mind Stone. It's a 2 mana rock. It taps for a colorless mana, and you can pay 1, sack it to draw a card. It's mana when we need it early, and it cycles itself later when we don't need it anymore. Great card. Pearl Medallion. It's a 2 mana artifact. White spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Funny thing, most of the cards in our deck are white, so most turns this will produce more than 1 mana for us by discounting. If we play 2 spells on a turn, this discounted 2 mana. So, and that will happen a lot. So excellent mana rock. These medallions are great in any mono-color deck. Soul Ring, you know what it does. It's here. Sword of Hearth and Home. 3 mana for an artifact equipment. It has 2 to equip. An equipped creature gets +2/+2 and is protection from green and white. And when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you exile up to 1 creature you own, and then you search your library for a basic land, and then you put them both into play. So it blinks a creature, and you get a ramp. You get a basic land. Seems really good for our deck. We have a lot of ETBs to take advantage of with this card, and the ramp will be appreciated. We have plenty of creatures to put this sword on to get in there. Decent number of flyers, some low to the ground idiot creatures to throw this on. And we don't, and the pro white doesn't really hurt us very much. We don't do a lot of like targeting of things on the battlefield. Like we're not like making our own auras fall off or anything like that when we equip this. So this doesn't really get in the way of our own effects, even though it's protection from our own color. So yeah, great card for this deck. Wayfarer's Bauble. It's a 1 mana artifact. You can pay 2 and sack to put a basic land from your deck into play tapped. Its artifact ramp gets us basic. It ramps us lands into play. So great card for this deck for sure. Lastly, Zurin Orb. Very important card for this deck. It's a 0 mana artifact, and you can sack a land to gain 2 life. This allows us to pay off our Fate's Rewards effects very well. We can sack all of our lands to gain a huge chunk of life and then bring them all back, trigger our landfall a ton of times again. Having a sack outlet for lands is a big deal for this deck. I almost decided to include Claw of Gix, which is a free artifact that you can pay 1 and sack a permanent to gain a life. So it's kind of like much worse Zurin Orb for the deck. But if it kind of comes about, I didn't put it in the sideboard, but if it comes about, if I feel like I really need another effect like this, I'll throw Claws of Gix in here and try it out. Because what you can do is you can tap the land for a mana and then sack it to the Claw of Gix with the mana that you produced from it. So it can kind of do a pseudo Zurin Orb sort of effect. But Zurin Orb still allows you to utilize all your mana. You can tap all your mana, use it all for things, then sack it all, then bring it all back with the face reward. So you don't have to jump through quite as few hoops. But, you know, Claws of Gix could still kind of do a pseudo impression of this card. But yeah, once again, Zurin Orb, very good card. Allows us to keep our land count low, gain some life, re-trigger our landfalls and stuff like that. So very important card. All right, we got a few enchantments for this deck. Most of these are just landfall payoffs, and then we have 1 or 2 just random synergy piece cards. Cathar's Crusade. It's 3 white for an enchantment. When a creature is the battlefield under you control, you put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Staple of white decks that go wide. Ultimately, endgame will start going wide. We'll start making a lot of 2/1s, and when those 2/1s start being much bigger than 2/1s and creating more than just 2/1s, Cathar's Crusade becomes a pretty reliable closer for us, making all of our creatures into big threats. And we have a lot of random flyers and tokens and stuff like that, so those will be lethal threats very easily with this card. And the 5 mana is not as big a deal for this deck as it is a lot of decks. As we are a land deck, we're going to have a lot of mana lying around, so the CMC of this card is not as big a deal in this deck as it would be in a lot of other decks. One of the most important cards in the deck, Felidar Retreat. 3 and a white for an enchantment. It has landfall. When land enters the battlefield you control, you choose 1. You either make a 2/2 cat beast with just a 2/2 cat beast, or you put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and then those creatures gain Vigilance till end of turn. So same thing we said about Cathar's Crusade, except we also can get creatures out of this one. Whenever we don't have anything going on, we need jump blockers early game. We're starting to develop our board and getting all of our landfall stuff going. This will just start churning out a big army of 2/2s, and then when we feel like we got enough 2/2s, we can start growing them all. So yeah, Felidar Retreat, one of the best landfall payoffs for this deck for sure. One of the best cards in the deck. Land tax, 1 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent has more lands than you, you can search your library for 3 basics, reveal them, put in your hand, then shuffle. Very importantly, in this deck, it's very important that every time we trigger this, we get 3 lands every time. As even if we have extra cards in hand and we need to discard, that's fine. Discarding lands is good for us as we can get them back later with a ton of different effects that we've been talking about. So just an important note with land tax here. You should probably do that in most games anyway. Just a tip for you. But this deck especially, you definitely want to make sure you always get 3 lands every land tax trigger that you have. Retreat to Emery, 3 and a white for very similar card to Felidar Retreat. The difference here is that we either get a 1/1 core ally or creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. As you can see, this is significantly worse than Felidar Retreat, as it's not counters and you just get 1/1s and you don't get any vigilance here. All that being said, I think this card's still plenty good enough, as Felidar Retreat is just completely insane for this deck, but even though this is on a much smaller scale, we'll still take it. Still a very good, reliable landfall payoff that's unlikely to get removed. Still produces us bodies, extra pump. Still does all the things Felidar Retreat does, just worse, but Felidar Retreat is one of the best cards in our deck, so we'll take a little bit worse version of it. Next up, Smothering Tithe. I'm not going to read through it. It's a white card that makes us a bunch of treasure. This card may end up getting cut, but we do. The reason that I decided to leave it in the deck is we do have a mana sink in the command zone, so we can take advantage of tons of mana. So a lot of times now, I think this card gets pretty overrated. It's a great card. I mean, the floor of this card is very high. However, I really feel like I need to be able to pay off the tons of mana that it produces, because a lot of times in the decks that I play, I just end up with a bunch of treasures, because I play really efficient and reliable sort of game plan decks. So most of the time, if I just end up with a bunch of random mana, it doesn't really do me a whole lot, right? For me. So I don't know. Smothering Tithe is kind of an iffy one. I think it gets pretty overrated, but it's impossible to deny that the floor of this card is extremely high. It's just a generically quite powerful card. So all that being said, I'm going to try it out in the deck, as I have a mana sink in the command zone. So worst case scenario, if I end up with a bunch of extra mana, I at least have somewhere to put it. So yeah, that's my spiel on Smothering Tithe for the video. Smuggler's Share, 2 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card. If for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards this turn, then you create a treasure token if they had 2 or more lands under the battlefield under their control. Just a good generic value card, reliable. I'm not sure how good this card is. I haven't gotten a chance to play it, but this seems like the place to try it out at least. Once again, similar to Smothering Tithe, the floor of this card seems pretty high. This card can kind of technically do nothing, whereas Smothering Tithe really can't. But I'm willing to try it out. Seems like a good card for the deck. We need some sort of card advantage, and the extra mana is not super important for us, but once again, we have a mana sink, so worst case scenario, we can throw the extra treasures in there. The Restoration of Iganjo, 2 and a white for a Saga enchantment. Chapter 1, search your library for a Plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Chapter 2, you may discard a card. When you do, return target permanent card with 2 mana value or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And then Chapter 3, this flips into a 3/4. Whoops, sorry, I missed the wrong one. Chapter 3, it flips into a 3/4 vigilance that makes 1/1s when it attacks or blocks. Not really that relevant on the backside, but at least the extra creatures are nice. What's nice here is we can search for our plains, then we can throw that plains away to the second ability to either put the plains we just got into play, or one of our other important cards that we've thrown into the bin, other synergy cards or lands that got blown up or something like that, fetch lands, all that stuff. So this card, the floor of this card seems pretty high. It ramps us, gets us back value. So yeah, seems like a good flexible card. I've been wanting to try this card out more. It seems like a good card, so it seems like a good fit for this deck. All right, lastly, we got some lands here. We have 19 plains. That's to be expected, obviously. I wanted to keep the plains count high here, as we have a lot of cards that get us plains. allow us to play planes if our opponents have more lands, search them up, all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to keep the planes count pretty high here. So I kept the utility lands to somewhat of a minimum for a land deck. There's a world where I could cut a few of the main deck cards just to add more lands. I don't really want to cut away from the 19 planes count, but if I find that I want some more utility lands, then I could make room from just cutting cards from the deck. Because right now I'm sitting at 37 with 3 DFCs. So there's a world where I could, reasonably have more lands than that, I would feel like. Land stacks typically, I usually look at getting 40 plus. But yeah, all that being said, we'll get into the lands. We have 19 planes, and then we'll kind of get into the interesting lands. Ancient Tomb, it taps for 2 and pings you for 2. Incredibly powerful land, great for our deck. We can still use the colorless mana pretty efficiently in this deck. But yeah, good land. Importantly, we have fetch lands in this deck. All the white fetch lands, Arid Mesa, Flooded Strand, Windswept Heath. So we have all 4 of them, and we even play Prismatic Vista. Once again, having lands on the battlefield to sack in response to like a face reward or something like that we're doing will just get us more lands. And having extra lands lying in the graveyard, we'll be able to get back with Sun Titans and Savine's Reclamations and that sort of stuff. So the fetch lands here, I know they're not the cheapest lands, but they are pretty important for this deck. They'll give you a lot of extra synergy and a lot of extra card value. Emery the Skyrim, one of the cards that pays us off for having a lot of planes. It enters the battlefield tapped. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 7 or more planes, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it taps for a white mana. So really, really high upside on just a tapped land that produces our color anyway. The only thing it asks you is just to have a lot of planes into play, which we're a mono white deck that gets lots of planes. So it doesn't seem too bad. We may wait a little later on into the game before this starts triggering, but we don't really like mill ourselves or put creatures in our graveyard ourselves outside of them just dying to whatever effects. So that's not a big deal here. Because once again, we're trying to keep our land count low, even though we're getting a lot of mana production. So it may take a little while for this to get online, but the upside's definitely there. Flagstones of Trochaire. It's a legendary land. It taps for a white. And when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for a plains card and put it on the battlefield tapped. Then you shuffle your library. Great card to sack to our Lotus Fields and such, as we just end up with an extra land out of the deal. So super sweet card for the deck for sure. Next up, we have Lotus Field. We've talked about it a lot. It's a hexproof land. Enters the battlefield tapped. And when it enters the battlefield, you sack 2 lands. So gets our land count low. And then this produces 3 mana of any one color. So once again, we end up with the same kind of amount of mana as that we're supposed to have. However, we have less lands, so we can more reliably trigger our landfall cards. Very similarly, we have Lotus Veil, which is basically the older version. It comes into play, you sacrifice 2 untapped lands. So Lotus Field enters tapped, and you have to sacrifice 2 lands, so presumably you tap the 2 lands first. And then Lotus Veil makes you sack the lands untapped, but it comes in untapped, and it produces 3 mana of any one color. So essentially the same card. The Lotus Field enters tapped while this one enters untapped, so you end up with a extra mana of the turn that Lotus Veil comes into play, but it's not hexproof like Lotus Field is, so it's a little bit more susceptible to removal. But with our Fate's Rewards effects and stuff like that, we can kind of protect it. If somebody tries to blow it up, we can bring it back. Also, when we sack the lands with Lotus Field and Lotus Veil, very importantly, we can cast our Brought Backs and our Cosmic Interventions to get the 2 lands that we sack back if we're kind of at that point where we want to start ramping and keeping our land count up. So yeah, very powerful cards. They're the important engine cards of the deck. And we have one more, Scorched Runes. When it comes into play, you sacrifice 2 untapped lands, and this taps for 4 colorless mana. So gets 1 extra mana over the Lotus Field and Veil, but it's all colorless. So this is definitely the worst of the 3, but we'll still take it. Still does the exact thing that we're looking to do in the deck. So the next up, we talked about the fetch lands. Next up, we got Myriad Landscape. This one's iffy for me. This one may end up getting cut. Enters the battlefield taps for a colorless mana. You can pay 2 and sack it to search your library for 2 basic land cards that share a type, and you put them into play tapped. It's a land that ramps. However, it gets our land count up. So it's, this is one that we would crack pretty late game. It's not something I'm looking to crack early game unless I'm really desperate. So That being said, it's probably still good enough for the deck in that scenario, even though it's just going to sit around for quite a while before we crack it. My main concern here is that it enters tapped as a colorless land. We don't want to sack it till later, and then if we want to start getting our Lotus Field Veil sort of engine going early on, like on turn like 4 or something, then it can be pretty awkward. Turn 3 or 4, then it can be pretty awkward because this is not like a great land to sack or whatever, and then it kind of sits there, and it can just lead to some awkward sort of game states, I think. So that being said, I think I'm going to give it a try. I think the effect is good enough that we can play around it a little bit here for our deck. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, an amazing land. It taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and tap it. Choose a color, add mana equal to the amount of devotion to that color. So obviously it's white. We end up with a lot of white pips, as we'll very reliably have 2 just from or 1 from our Heliod, and then we have plenty of cards that have double white pips. So yeah, our white pips are definitely going to be very high. So a lot of times this is going to produce us a ton of mana. So great land. Doesn't really ask us to have a lot of lands to produce a lot of mana either. So another upside there. Scavenger Grounds. It's a land desert. It taps for a colors. You can pay 2, tap, and sack a desert to exile all cards from all graveyards. So this one's a little weird, as we do play with our graveyard quite a bit. But I do want some graveyard hate in the deck, and putting it on a land slot seems like the place to fit it in. And even though we have to hit our own graveyards when we're activating this, we're going to be in a pretty dire situation. So we're not just going to throw this away when somebody tries to reanimate like just some random garbage creature. This is something that's like, oh, we're about to lose the game if I don't activate this, so I better activate this. And luckily we can hold this up and hold up like a Heliod activation at the same time. So if we want to leave up mana for Scavenger Grounds, if we think something dangerous is about to happen, at least we're also holding up some other effect to get some value, so we're not just wasting the mana. So yeah, Scavenger Grounds is a great land, and we need some graveyard hate. Strip Mine, it's a land that taps for colorless mana, or you can sack it to destroy another land. Once again, sacking lands to our graveyard, we can easily bring them back, and sometimes our opponents are going to have busted lands, so we need to be able to interact with them. So Strip Mine's here to do that. Terrain Generator, it taps for a colorless mana. You can pay 2 and tap it to put a basic land from your hand into the battlefield tapped. Cool card. Allows us to ramp and put basics into play. But once again, we want to try to keep our land count somewhat low in the early game. But for the late game, when we have a bunch of lands lying in our hand from our land tax, after we're satisfied with catching up with the land count of everybody else, then we can start deploying them with this card, or we can leave up the Heliod activation. So, good card for the deck. Urza Saga, a pretty powerful card, but really good in this deck. It's a enchantment land. When it enters the battlefield, it goes to Chapter 1, and then it taps for a colorless mana. Chapter 2, it also gets the ability to make a construct by paying 2 and tapping it, which is an artifact creature token that gets power and tempest equal to the number of artifacts you control. And then Chapter 3, you sack this, and then you search your library for an artifact with converted mana cost 0 or 1, and you put it onto the battlefield, then you shuffle. So once again, when the land's going to the graveyard here is a good thing, because we can easily recur them in this deck. And we have a lot of quite good artifacts at the 1 and 0 CMC. We'll go back and look real quick. We have Expedition Map, very important for this deck. It allows us to get any land, like our Lotus Fields and such. We have Gerard's Hourglass Pendant now, which is our face reward effect. We have Zurin Orb, which is a sack outlet for our lands. And we still have the normal Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble sort of suite. So yeah, for this deck, Urza Saga seems like a perfect fit. It kind of gets us whatever we need. Do we need our Lotus Field? Okay, we can start getting that sort of thing going, or our Myriad or whatever. Are we set up to do our Lotus Field thing? Do we already have that in hand and we want to sack a bunch of lands all at once? Okay, we can get Gerard's Hourglass Pendant. Or hey, do we need a way to sack out lands because we have the payoff to get them all back? Okay, we can get the Zurin Orb. So yeah, Urza Saga is a great role player for this deck, and it can just randomly make us creatures if we got nothing better to do. We can very reliably bring it back and do it again, so this can kind of accrue all of the pieces to our game plan slowly over time if we don't ever draw them, or, naturally get them with whatever, or we don't get any tutors. If our game plan goes really bad, then this is a good card to kind of get out of that situation as well. So, amazing card Urza Saga is. It's a pretty broken card. But it's a really good card for this deck. Gets us all of this energy pieces that we would want. And it can make us tokens and still produces mana in the meantime. So, great card. War Room. I've talked about this card a lot. Love this card. Taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay 3, tap, and pay life equal to your commander's color identity, which is 1, to draw a card. So when we run out of things to do and we're holding up mana, we can, make, once again, we can always make the tokens from Heliod if we need to. Or if we have this, we can leave this up and draw cards with it too. So War Room, excellent card. Put it in all your mono color decks, 0 color decks. It can go in a lot of 2 color decks as well. Really good mana sink utility land here. Love to see a War Room. Okay, so that's what I've decided to go with on the main deck for now. Like I said, there's kind of a sub theme of tokens that I would like to add, as that's what most of the sideboard focuses on. They're cards that I kind of ended up cutting, as they either were too weak, I think, for the game plan, or we had much better effects that did the same thing, or it leans into kind of the token synergy. So if you do end up going the tokens route here, or I start moving it into that direction, you're going to see your normal suite of sort of token cards, like Anointed Procession, which is 4 mana and doubles your tokens that you make, or Divine Visitation, which makes your creature tokens into 4/4 angels with flying and vigilance. You'll see all that sort of normal stuff into your, if you start moving into the tokens deck. These are the first 2 that I'm going to grab, and then I'll start working my way down to the other sort of tokens that you pay off cards, Secure the Waste, all that stuff. Finale of Glory is a good mana sink here that we have that makes us tons of tokens. So same thing here. Hall of Heliod's Generosity. If we start leaning more into the tokens sort of side of things, and I get these other 2 really important enchantments in the deck, Anointed Procession and Divine Visitation, then I'm going to make room for Hall of Heliod's Generosity. So that's kind of why I put it here as well. Once you start getting into the token side of things, you start having some really important enchantments. The enchantments I have here are good, but they're not like essential to my game plan. So I figured it was just better for me just to put a plains in to get more plains in the deck. Isle of Oblivion, once again, another really good card for the tokens side of things. I think it's probably good enough to make the deck as it is, as we can pretty reliably make tokens with our commander, and we can just use this to reliably draw cards. So this may be one that I just put in instead of like Trove Warden or something, just for, a little bit more reliable value in the deck. But yeah, Idol of Oblivion's an excellent card. I've been over impressed with this card. Any deck that makes tokens pretty frequently, I've been trying this card out in, and it's always been an overperformer. It's kind of like a weird Phyrexian Arena just for 2 mana, so great card. Mangara the Diplomat. This card's just kind of a generic value card that I decided to cut from the deck, as most of the other generic value cards I had in the deck were quite a bit lower mana, or more kind of sticky, more reliable, like they were enchantments or something like that. So if I feel like I need another sort of just generic value card, this is probably the next one I'm going to. Navigation Orb. It's a 3 mana artifact. You can pay 2 and sack it, search the library for 2 basic lands cards or gates, and put 1 into play, tap, and the other into your hand. So this card's very similar to Burnished Heart, which is in the deck, but very importantly, Burnished Heart is a creature, and it puts both of the lanes into play immediately. I think Navigation Orb is like a maybe here, but I just feel like I have plenty of ramp and mana sources in the deck. I feel like for this card, you really want to be able to get the gates thing going. Like, that's kind of the more important card here. Just getting basics doesn't really feel great with this card, I don't think. So this card seems like it could fit the deck, but I think it might be a bit on the weak side for the deck. Revvy Arc, another just kind of generic value card that ended up getting cut. 4 and a white for a 4/3 flyer. When it leaves the battlefield, return 2 target creature cards with power 2 less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you can evoke it for 6. When I started looking down the list, there's a few ones that I really liked, like the Skyclave Apparition, the Mirror Entity, and there's a few other random ones like Core Cartographer, Night of the White Orchid, Esper Sentinel, that sort of stuff, Karmic Guide. But we don't really put them in the graveyard ourselves, so the sort of reanimation aspect of this card doesn't seem reliable enough, and it's a little bit narrow. We don't have a ton of cards that will reliably put into the graveyard to get this effect going. So as kind of just a generic value card, I think it's just ended up getting the axe. I don't think it quite makes the cut. Skull Clamp, this is another one that is probably supposed to be in the deck, but and it'll probably end up in the deck shortly. It's a 1 mana equipment, equips for 1. Equipped creature gets +1/-1, and when a equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. Just a very, very powerful draw engine. As I was kind of looking through the list, I just didn't see a lot of X ones kind of in the deck, and the ones that I did aren't like easily throwing awayable. That's not a word, but you get what I mean. So yeah, as it stands, it just didn't feel like there was enough things to put it on. I mean, it does allow us to put it on the Heliod tokens because there are 2/1s. But you know, once we're starting to create Heliod tokens, at that point, I'm hoping to have some like Cathar's Crusade or Felidar Retreat where I'm growing them and they're not going to even die to the Skull Clamp. So I don't know. If you lean more into the tokens route, you start getting a bunch of 1/1 tokens lying around. Then Skull Clamp obviously becomes insane in the deck. But as it stands now, it just doesn't seem like I have enough things to reliably sack to this. So didn't make the cut. Sword of the Animist. It's a 2-mana equipment that equips for 2. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and when it attacks, you search library for a basic, put it into play tapped. So I'm going to try out Hearth and Home. This one seems way better for the deck as the flicker value here is very good for my deck. So yeah, Sword of the Animist. It doesn't give me that extra utility, that extra oomph. So if I find that Sword of Hearth and Home is just like the best card in the deck because it gets extra lands, then I might try out Sword of the Animist. But as it stands, like I said, I want to keep the land count kind of low on the battlefield most of the time, ideally, so that way I'm triggering all my things, getting all my extra lands that way. So and I don't have a ton of low drop creatures that are going to be getting in there reliably, so it doesn't feel like I can just throw this on whenever and feel real good about it. So ended up getting the cut. So yeah, all that being said, tell me what you guys think. This is my mono white kind of landfall idea. The kind of shell of the deck. You can probably see here what my plan is and what my goal is. There's definitely some wheels that can kind of be turned here as we can cut a lot of these generic value cards for, you know, whatever. I would recommend putting other things that get you, you know, extra cards or more card value in your hand so that way you don't run out of things to do. As I'm kind of leaning heavy on those cards to be my sort of card draw source. So, yeah, that being said, I just didn't feel like there was enough deck slots like on the base level to be able to squeeze in the extra like token package into this deck. Felt like to get my mana ramp going, I had to have a decent number of cards, and then I also needed to have the extra cards for card draw just to make the deck kind of go. But yeah, tell me what you all think. This is my mono white landfall with Heliod God of the Sun at the helm. If you guys have any deck suggestions or commanders you'd like to see, brews that you've been kind of thinking around, please share them in the comment section. I'd love to hear them. Maybe I can help you brew a deck or, you know, whatever. So anyway, y'all have a great night. Thanks for tuning in. Look forward to the Dominaria United set review with the commanders and the full set coming out soon. So take care of yourselves. Love y'all.